Welcome to Life Stories, where we share the profound and inspiring journeys of individuals who have faced life's challenges head-on. Today's story is about an unexpected connection between a kind-hearted police officer and a homeless woman who, despite life's hardships, never gave up on herself. Their bond grew from a simple act of kindness into a transformative journey, showing how empathy and patience can change lives. Join us as we explore how small moments of compassion can have a lasting impact. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to start today's story. It was a warm afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs lazily in the sky, casting long shadows across the busy city streets. Officer Michael Carter adjusted his belt as he stepped out of the downtown precinct, taking a deep breath of the cool air. His lunch break had arrived. A rare hour of peace amidst the constant hum of sirens, dispatch calls, and the never-ending rhythm of city life. He relished the quiet moments when he could simply exist in the world around him, without the weight of the badge pressing down on his shoulders. Michael walked toward the small park just a few blocks from the station. It was a place he often came to clear his mind, to gather himself before returning to the demands of the job. With a sandwich in hand, he scanned the park for a quiet spot to sit. The benches were scattered about, each offering a different view of the trees, the flowers, the people passing by. But today, his eyes were drawn to one in particular. There, sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench near the entrance, was a black woman in her early 50s. Her clothes were faded and frayed at the edges, a thick coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Despite the warmth of the afternoon sun, her face was weathered by time, marked by the deep lines of a life filled with struggles and hardships. Yet, there was something dignified about her posture, her hands resting in her lap, her back straight, as if she refused to let the world strip her of her dignity. She wasn't begging, she wasn't holding a cardboard sign, she wasn't shouting for help or trying to get anyone's attention. She simply sat there, observing the world around her, her eyes steady, her gaze distant. It was a look Michael had seen before, in veterans who had seen too much, in mothers working tirelessly to keep food on the table, in people who had been knocked down by life but refused to stay down. As Michael walked past, their eyes met. She gave him a slight nod, acknowledgement. Not a plea for help, not an expectation, just a quiet nod, a simple recognition of another human being passing by. Michael paused, feeling something stir inside him. It was a fleeting moment, but it felt significant. He had seen this woman many times before in the city, but today, for some reason, something about her made him stop. He turned back, his steps slower now, and approached the bench where she sat. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice calm but gentle, almost as if he were asking permission from a stranger to join her in her quiet solitude. She eyed him warily, as though measuring him for a moment. Then, with a shrug, she muttered, "Public bench." It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. Michael smiled and lowered himself onto the seat beside her. He unwrapped his sandwich, took a bite, and then, without hesitation, offered the other half to her. "I've got more than I need," he said casually, as though it were no big deal. She glanced at the sandwich, then at him, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "I don't take handouts," she replied firmly. Michael didn't flinch. He took another bite of his sandwich and shrugged. "It's not a handout," he said. "I just don't like eating alone." There was a moment of silence between them. Michael didn't push. He had learned over the years that people who had endured hardship didn't open up to strangers just because they were asked. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. Finally, she exhaled slowly, her hands moving to take the sandwich. "Guess I can help you out then," she muttered, her tone dry but not unkind. They ate in silence, the only sounds the rustling of leaves overhead and the occasional chatter of people passing through the park. Michael had learned to be patient with silence. Some people needed time before they could speak, before they could trust someone enough to share a piece of themselves. Eventually, it was she who broke the quiet. "You always share your lunch with strangers?" she asked, her voice a little softer now, though still guarded. Michael smiled, a little amused. Only the ones who look like they could use a good meal," he said, his tone light but sincere. She glanced at him, a slight frown pulling at the corners of her lips. "That's supposed to mean something?" Michael shook his head, swallowing his bite of sandwich. "No, just means I've seen people struggle. And I figure, if I can make one part of their day easier, it's worth it." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a quiet huff, she spoke again. "You a cop?" Michael nodded. "Brookfield Police Department," he replied, his voice even. She let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Well, ain't that something?" she muttered, taking another bite of her sandwich. Michael exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting to the people passing by. He knew what she meant. He had seen it, too, the way some officers treated the homeless like they were nothing more than nuisances. The way they moved them along, as though their mere presence was an inconvenience. He didn't blame her for her skepticism. He knew she had every right to question his motives. "I'm not like most cops," he said quietly, meeting her gaze. For a long moment, she looked at him, really looked at him, as though she were weighing his words, trying to decide if they meant anything. Finally, she nodded, a silent decision made. "Name's Sarah," she said, offering him a small but genuine smile. "Michael," he replied, extending a hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a significant one. Neither of them knew it yet, but that brief moment, that simple act of sharing a sandwich on a park bench, would change both of their lives in ways neither could have predicted. The next day came, bright and warm, much like the one before. Michael found himself, almost without thinking, heading back to the park. He told himself it was just another lunch break, that he hadn't planned it. But deep down, something told him he was hoping to see Sarah again. There was something about their brief conversation the day before that lingered with him, something about her quiet strength, her dignity, despite the circumstances. He walked into the park, his sandwich in hand, his eyes scanning for that weathered bench. And there she was, sitting in the same spot, the same posture, her coat wrapped tightly around her as though protecting herself from more than just the sun. When she saw him approaching, her expression remained unreadable, but Michael could see something shift in her gaze. It was as if she'd been expecting him, just like he'd been expecting her. Without asking, Michael lowered himself onto the bench beside her. Unwrapping his sandwich, he placed the second one between them, wordlessly offering it to her. This time, she didn't hesitate. She reached for it almost immediately, her hands quick and sure. She took a bite, her eyes never leaving the sandwich for a moment. There was a certain quiet rhythm to their interactions now, a comfort that hadn't been there before. They sat in silence for a few moments, eating their lunch, the air between them comfortable, no longer filled with the uncertainty of the day before. Eventually, it was Sarah who spoke first, her voice steady but filled with a kind of weariness. "Used to work down at the old shipping warehouse off Jefferson," she said, as though speaking about a different life. 15 years. Good job. Hard work. But steady." Michael chewed slowly, listening intently. He had never been one to push for details, but he could sense that Sarah was starting to open up, even if just a little. She wasn't asking for sympathy or pity, he knew that. She was simply telling him what had happened, and Michael respected that. "What happened?" he asked, his voice quiet but genuine. "The company went under," she said simply, looking down at her hands as though the answer didn't surprise her anymore. "No severance, no warning, just locked doors one morning. A couple of us tried to fight it, but you know how that goes. Nobody cares when folks like me lose their jobs." Michael didn't respond immediately. There was nothing to say. She was right. The world often didn't care about people like Sarah, the ones who worked hard, did their part, and still ended up with nothing. She glanced at him, meeting his gaze for the first time since they'd sat down. And after that, it just got worse. Rent got too high, bills piled up. I tried to find something else. But it's hard when you ain't got a fancy degree. When you're not qualified for anything but lifting boxes and working yourself to the bone. Her voice softened at the end, and Michael could hear the weariness in it, the kind of exhaustion that didn't just come from physical labor but from the weight of a life lived without the luxury of choices. "That's a raw deal," Michael said softly, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Sarah gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "Yeah, well, ain't like I'm special. There's plenty of folks out here with worse stories." Michael didn't argue. He knew she was right. Instead, he shifted the conversation, wanting to lighten the mood just a bit. "So, what do you do during the day? Besides tolerating cops who won't leave you alone at lunch?" he asked, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. Sarah huffed a small laugh. "Library sometimes," she said, her voice less harsh now. "They don't mind if you sit there for a few hours. Better than the shelters. Those places." She shook her head, her lips tightening. "You ever been inside one?" Michael shook his head. "Not as a resident," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "but I've been called to them before. Fights, overdoses, thefts. Shelters can be dangerous, more dangerous than the streets." Sarah gave a small snort. "No kidding." Michael didn't respond. He didn't need to. She'd said it all with that single comment. He'd seen it too, the overcrowded, dangerous shelters where people could go from being invisible to being a number on a list. A face in a crowd. "I get it," he said, his voice soft. "I really do." Sarah didn't say anything, but Michael could see the way her shoulders relaxed just a little. As if something in her had softened too. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A beginning of trust, of understanding. Neither of them knew it yet. But this simple lunch, this quiet conversation, would change their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and what had begun as a simple gesture of sharing lunch had grown into something much more. Michael found himself looking forward to his lunch breaks not because of the food but because of the time he spent with Sarah. Each day, he returned to the same bench, a sandwich in hand, ready to sit in comfortable silence, ready to listen, and each day, Sarah was there, waiting for him. Their conversations deepened, moving from surface-level exchanges to discussions about life, struggle, and survival. Michael learned about Sarah's past, about the hardships she had endured. But there was something deeper in the way she spoke, a quiet strength, a resilience that couldn't be broken. The lessons Sarah taught him weren't always spoken aloud. They were in the quiet moments, the small gestures, in the way she would read the newspaper he brought her, despite her difficulty with reading, in the way she laughed, not out of bitterness, but because life had given her no other choice. Michael admired her for that, her ability to carry herself with dignity in a world that had repeatedly knocked her down. One afternoon, Michael showed up with a newspaper under his arm. He handed it to her, offering her the same quiet gesture that had become routine. Sarah took the paper, her fingers brushing against the edge. But as soon as she started looking at it, Michael saw the stiffness in her shoulders. She wasn't reading it, she was pretending to. A heavy silence fell between them, and Michael's heart sank. He hadn't expected it, but now that he saw it, it was obvious. She couldn't read. The realization hit him with a weight he hadn't anticipated. He had known Sarah for weeks now, and yet there was so much he hadn't known. Without making a big deal of it, he decided to address it carefully. "You're not really reading it, are you?" he asked gently, his voice low. For a long moment, Sarah didn't respond. She lowered the newspaper slightly, avoiding his gaze. Then, with a soft chuckle that lacked humor, she muttered, "Ain't that something? A white cop figures out that the black homeless lady can't read. Bet you feel real proud of yourself." Her words were sharp, meant to deflect, to push him away. Michael could feel the walls going up again. The defenses she had built over years of being written off by society, of being seen as less than. But he didn't flinch. He wasn't here to judge her. He wasn't here to pity her either. He simply wanted to help. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady, "I'm not here to make you feel small. I'm just here to help. If you'll let me." For a long while, Sarah didn't speak. She folded the newspaper carefully, setting it aside. The silence between them was thick, But Michael didn't rush her. He let the weight of the moment settle. Finally, she exhaled, her voice softer now. Dropped out in middle school, she admitted, her eyes flickering up to meet his. Had to take care of my mama. Then life just kept happening. You don't need to read to work a loading dock. Not to survive. Anyway, there was no self-pity in her voice, only a quiet resignation. It's not like I never tried to learn, she continued, but when you get older, people just assume you know how to read. You learn to fake it. Nod along. Act like you understand. Most folks don't care enough to notice. Michael listened quietly, understanding more with each word. He had always known that Sarah wasn't the stereotypical image of a homeless person. Someone who had fallen to the streets due to laziness or lack of will. No, she had fought. She had tried. But life, for all its injustices, had not been kind. Without saying a word, Michael stood and reached into his bag. When he turned back to Sarah, he held out a book, a slim, well-worn paperback he had grabbed from his own shelf that morning. "This is for you," he said, his tone gentle. "I thought we could start small." Sarah eyed the book with suspicion, her fingers tapping the bench nervously. She didn't take it immediately, her body language tense, like she was wrestling with some unspoken fear. Finally, she spoke, her voice dry but laced with a hint of humor. "You're really gonna teach a 50-year-old woman her ABCs?" Michael chuckled softly, the warmth of his smile reaching his eyes. "I figure if I can talk a guy down from waving a gun at me, I can handle a few reading lessons." Her lips twitched in the smallest of smiles. But she didn't reach for the book. Instead, she stared at it for a moment longer, her thoughts clearly at war. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "You know, when you're a kid, not knowing how to read just means you fall behind in class. But when you're grown, not knowing how to read makes you invisible." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Michael didn't respond right away, letting the weight of her statement settle into him. He understood now, in a way he hadn't before, the full depth of what Sarah had been carrying. She had lived a life where not being able to read had stripped her of so many opportunities, left her to navigate a world that didn't accommodate people like her. Without another word, she picked up the book, her fingers curling around it with more reverence than Michael had expected. And in that moment, he knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about reading. This was about reclaiming something she had lost a long time ago, her dignity, her voice, and her future. Michael smiled, a quiet promise passing between them. He wasn't going anywhere, he was going to help her, one small step at a time. Months passed, and the bond between Michael and Sarah grew stronger with every passing day. What started as a simple act of kindness, sharing a sandwich, had blossomed into a journey neither of them could have anticipated. Sarah, once silent and hesitant, now read aloud with growing confidence, her eyes lighting up with each word she recognized. Michael watched in awe as she transformed, not just in her ability to read, but in the way she carried herself. The woman who once felt invisible had begun to reclaim her voice. One day, Sarah showed up at the park with a brochure in her hand. It was for a job at a local grocery store, a job that required reading and basic skills she had once thought impossible to master. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the paper. But Michael was there, just like always, offering his unwavering support. "You can do this," Michael said softly. "You've already proven to yourself that you can do things you never thought possible." That was the moment Sarah decided to take the leap. She applied for the job, went through the interview, and, against all odds, she got hired. The sense of pride in her eyes when she told Michael was unmatched. It wasn't just about the job. It was about believing in herself again. About proving that no matter how many times life knocked her down, she could always get back up. As Sarah stood by the bench one afternoon, now employed and filled with hope for the future, she smiled at Michael. "I think I owe you lunch. Don't I?" Michael grinned. "You definitely do." This story, like so many others, is a reminder that a single act of kindness can ripple outward, changing not just one life, but an entire community. If you found this story inspiring, be sure to subscribe to our channel to keep up with new life stories.